Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
I'm outside the Moroccan home of Shaykh Muhammad Al-Yaqoubi, who's been living here in exile from Syria for some time now. So we're about to go and see him, talk to him about his new life here and see what he feels the next step for his country, Syria, is. Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Most welcome.
Beautiful home.
Thank you for coming. It's been a long drive from here.
Wow, what a beautiful, beautiful home. The ceiling looks like something out of the Alhambra.
This is a traditional Andalusian style used in Morocco here.
Yes, it's stunning.
Often in some homes.
It's really beautiful. I see a beautiful table with lots of lovely biscuits and, and tea set out.
Shaykh Muhammad Yaqoubi is a leading ulama or Islamic scholar and comes from a prominent family of such scholars who've taught the sacred sciences for centuries.
That was delicious.
He was the Friday speaker in the Al-Hassan Mosque in Damascus until he was forced to flee the country in 2011 after publicly criticising the ruling Baath party and supporting the Syrian uprising. We began by talking about his religious upbringing in Syria, a country which before the uprising, he says, had always been defined by its religious openness and tolerance.
Syria is a land that has a beautiful example of coexistence, a long history of tolerance, a beautiful example of what we may call sense of unity between all religions. If I start from where I grew up, around the Umayyad Mosque, the Grand Umayyad Mosque, this is the heart of Damascus. In that mosque, John the Baptist, Prophet Yahya, is buried. So it was very natural for us to see tourists, foreigners coming, pouring in. But not only that, actually, what is amazing, just half a mile around the Umayyad Mosque, you get the Christian quarter, and the Jewish quarter, and the Shiite quarter. And we didn't grow up with any sense of hostile feelings against others. We say in Islam, the truth is evident, self-evident. Whoever would like to embrace it, they are welcome. We don't go to others to provoke them, to proselytize to them. And they don't come to us also to proselytize to us. We have come to a common agreement that, as Allah says in the Quran, لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. Your religion belongs to you, our religion belongs to us. What we need to be worried about is our social interaction to be really smooth and for the best benefit of our peoples, for the community and for the country. And this actually has ever existed in Syria and has helped a lot, giving this beautiful image.
And you were born into a family, into a tradition where Islamic teaching was almost your fate, some might say.
You would say your fate, destiny, but I loved it. It's my choice. If I didn't want to do it, my father wouldn't force me to do it. But I found all pleasure in studying, and later on, as early as I was 17, I was a public speaker for Friday sermons. Yes, my father was a great scholar and was in the Umayyad Mosque.
And a big influence on you.
The biggest influence on me. Indeed, and my grandfather was a great saint. My father's uncle was an imam of the Grand Umayyad Mosque. My father's uncle was also Al-Yaqoubi. My grandfather's cousin was also an instructor and imam in the Grand Umayyad Mosque. I'm the fourth in the family in the Grand Umayyad Mosque, and this is a great honor. But actually what is really distinct about this is knowledge has tradition. And this tradition cannot be picked up like by attending few lectures at university, especially when it has to do with religion. And religion now is misused, I would say abused, and is a tool now to judge people to hell or to kill people. And we say, and this is a tradition, we give it to students when they first come to us. First session is a hadith of mercy called Hadith al-Rahmah. Some words of the Prophet peace be upon him, he says, Allah shows mercy, God shows mercy to those who are merciful, only to those who are merciful. If you want to be entitled to God's mercy, then show mercy to whoever is on the face of the earth. This is how we start our journey in the sacred knowledge.
With all of that in mind, the current state of your country must distress you enormously, because there's a distinct lack of mercy being shown in Syria.
It is devastating, really. And what is devastating more and more is how Syrian people some of them turned into monsters. You couldn't believe it. Some people ask me, how did you allow such a totalitarian regime to remain in power for 50 years? I said, it is just the love and the mercy that the Syrian people had. They didn't want to kill others. We never imagined that Syrian people would kill each other. We never encouraged people to rebel in that military style.
Let me ask you about that, though, because you ultimately spoke out very strongly against Bashar al-Assad. But there was a period when you and other clerics, naturally, you were trying to retain that Syrian life you described, that coexistence.
Exactly, trying to make some reform.
Do you look back on that, on those attempts and that relationship that you were attempting to have with the regime before the violence began, before even the uprising, and feel a little fooled by it, by him?
I think every Syrian people feels that the president fooled them. I think the international community feels this. President Assad was received in presidential palaces, royal palaces in Europe, around the world, and was welcomed, and red carpets were put for him. People had hopes in him. He turned to be a big liar.
You don't encourage violence, but you're on the record as saying it's time to organise, to register, to arm, to assist the Free Syrian Army.
Exactly.
And I know there are more groups than the Free Syrian Army on the ground active in Syria, but how do you square that circle as a man of God?
I wish the West listened to my calls. This is like almost 2 years ago. I started calling to assist, to arm, to organize, to provide logistic support for the FSA, Free Syrian Army, just to avoid actually the chaos that is happening now. We noticed from the early, let's say, months of the uprising that small groups started being organized, carrying guns to defend themselves, sometimes out of necessity because their villages were invaded. Sometimes they wanted to fight the regime
just
deliberately.
Ordinary citizens,
exactly. Now, what is dangerous is if there is an ideology behind this group, then you would feel really that there is some agenda within, the fighting against the regime. We felt this from the beginning. This is why when the Free Syrian Army started, especially when Colonel Riyad Assad started, we encouraged him because we need one authority, one army. And to find room for those who defected from the Syrian army and use them rather than bringing foreign fighters from all around the world.
But it wouldn't have been one army, would it? It would have been two. The Syrian army and the new Free Syrian Army.
Exactly.
Essentially civil war.
Exactly. Well, but better than having 2,000 military squads now fighting for an ideology. Well, the FSA is fighting for liberation of the Syrian people and for the unity of the country. They're not fighting for a certain agenda or for an Islamic state.
You sound like events in Syria have forced you to be very pragmatic about this whole business of military attack, of using violence, of using killing to reach some kind of solution, however imperfect it is. I wonder, before you made those statements, what kind of agreement or disagreement or conversations took place between you and your fellow clerics, your fellow scholars, about the moral rights and wrongs of this and how far you could take pragmatism when you're men of God?
Well, let me tell you, in the beginning in Damascus, when I was in Damascus, for example, in April 2011, we agreed that we should wait for the promised reforms which the president declared in his first speech. We waited for a few weeks. Then we heard the news. People were killed, tanks, military tanks, just crushed, ran over demonstrators, and the rest of the story and how many people were killed around Damascus, in the south of Damascus, in Latakia, in Homs, and so on. So there was there was no room for reform at all. Still, we banned carrying arms, and we wanted people to protest peacefully, because peaceful reforms were much stronger at that point. I had to leave Syria myself just for my safety, because last sermon I delivered in Damascus, the regime didn't have any tolerance for it. There was not room to accept any of my statements
and
there.
Can I take you back to a period of time just before that speech, or weeks and months before that speech? You were interrogated 4 or 5 times, I think?
I believe 5 times I was interrogated.
And give me a sense of what that meant. Was that discussion? Was it questions? Was it them telling you what you should and shouldn't say? Was it threats? Was it menace? Was it violence?
Well, at one point, few points, it was a discussion. On one occasion, it was a threat that I would be imprisoned. At one point, actually, I was called, this is like in January 2011, I was called to the political branch of the Secret Service, and I was a new officer. Secret Service received me for the first time, and
this is the regime.
Was frowning. This is the regime, and presented to me a white paper. Said, write a declaration that you never tackle any political subject in your speeches. And with a stern look, I said, look, why shall I write? The president himself encourages reforms, and all what we're doing is encouraging reforms and calling people for reform. And this is part of our job. This is not politics. I'm not talking about politics. He said, no argument, and started threatening. I had a colleague with me, one of my friends. So the man went in and out of the room and was threatening. And then later on, my friend said, well, if you want to get out of here safely, just sign it, please, let us get out. So I signed the paper and left the room. So I knew that with my last speech, there won't be any room for me in the country to accept what I say.
Is that because you signed the paper knowing you weren't going to abide by the paper? You were going to speak, and if it meant politically, so be it.
Of course. This is our job. Our job is when people, when people are killed in the streets, we have to say this is wrong.
And when you came to make that speech, did you think, once I've done this, I have to leave? I have to leave Syria?
After the speech, I was convinced that for my safety, I have to leave Syria. The following day, our neighbors told us that the Secret Service knocked at my door. If I continued to work in public, I have to speak up. They wouldn't tolerate the level I spoke about, denouncing all the atrocities and accusing the regime of torture, accusing the regime of killing people at military checkpoints. This is openly, holding the regime responsible for all this. This is what I did in my Friday sermon.
We talked a moment ago about how a man of God who talk eloquently about peace can then find himself talking about arming individuals. But
not arming individuals, arming FSA, okay. Because there's a huge difference. I mean, all the troubles we got are from individuals actually not being organized and carrying arms. They destroyed the country now.
Has it tested your faith, finding yourself saying, we need weapons, we need to fight back?
I don't like it, to be honest. I hate war. And as a person, and add to it, my religious education and responsibilities, and belief in God, I hate getting in war. I called for an intervention, because we need to put an end to this, killing of innocent people. Now we have a regime. If the regime is toppled, now the people will be safe. Now we have approximately, according to statistics, probably 150,000. Real figures speak about 250,000 people being killed. If a military strike took place a year ago, we would have saved the life of 100,000 at least.
And can I ask you to what degree you wished to see intervention, and perhaps still do?
The point is, as long as the regime and the international community agrees on this is the source of violence in the country, you need to put an end to the regime. The regime is backed by international powers like Russia and Iran, and its fire force is beyond imagination. So the regime has to be toppled.
But you're not talking about EU and US intervention, are you?
Whoever helps. I mean, Syria has a lot of friends.
As a Sufi, what challenges has this posed to your faith?
Zero, because Sufism means submission to God, accepting everything that comes from God. Actually, Sufism is the solution, is the remedy for the suffering of people. And we are more capable of offering help, solace, and explanations to people why this is happening to them. People in agony, people lost their loved ones, people lost their homes, and we need to explain to them the divine laws and move them from this realm of suffering into a realm of spiritual ecstasy, where they connect to God and they feel that God is close to them. The other point which I would like to highlight is Sufism believes everything is run by God. Now, our job is to obey Him in proceeding our normal life. We have to put an end to the suffering. We have to do our duties. We have to, stop the oppressors. But by the end, if something happens to us, we believe God is bringing us closer to Him.
Even the horrors of Syria?
Well, the horrors of Syria is happening for a certain wisdom. In all religions, including Islam is not an exception. We know that God is not to be questioned why He does. There is a great wisdom in everything He does. Now, if the wisdom doesn't appear in the suffering itself, it appears in the rewards in the heavens later on. It appears in the ranks which people are granted after life. Because as believers in all religions, we believe in afterlife. And we believe that punishment and rewards do not end in this life.
It's interesting to see you say so confidently, zero struggle within my faith about this.
Of course.
I wonder about your leaving of Syria. Have you looked back on your time away from Syria at any point and felt dismayed or even guilty about leaving it?
Not a single moment. I always thank God that He helped me speak up. He opened my mouth. He gave me courage. It's not my own courage. It's from God that I spoke up and I supported people in their suffering. Because if you want to survive salvation on the end of time, and get to heavens, you have to be supporting right and getting, away from wrong. Now, it's not about right and wrong. It's about, criminals now leading the country and killing innocent people.
When it comes to what kind of conflict this now is, you have said you and other clerics never used religion as the centre of your discourse about the problems in Syria. It looks to be becoming an increasingly, not necessarily a religious conflict, but certainly a sectarian conflict. What role do you think that clerics, scholars like you, or any man of God in Syria, has in the solution?
That's a very important point. I think we have a great responsibility in the beginning here to tell people Islam's position towards other religious groups. I don't like using the word minorities. We are all equal before God, and we should all be equal in front of the law. However, in this troubling time now, we need to tell people that no one should be responsible for other people's crimes. So we've made certain rules in all of our statements. For example, the Alawite minority, which is in power now, we don't hold the community, Alawite community, responsible for the crime committed by the regime. End. Period. That's it.
Although I wonder if, and let's hope this is the case, that 10 years from now, sooner hopefully, but 10 years from now, Syria is peaceful again. Let's just imagine that one day a young Sunni Muslim comes to see you for advice and says, I hate the Alawites. The Shia invited terrorists into this country. The Christians didn't do enough. I hate them all. They killed my mother, they killed my brother. Whatever that person's history
That's
is.
very wrong. I don't accept it now, and I will not accept it 10 years later. I will never accept it.
What will you say to them?
I would tell them this is very wrong, because hatred is a source of destruction, self-destruction. This is number one. Hatred of anything. We don't hate others. Now, if there is evil, we hate evil. But to hate people for religion or ethnicity or anything. I believe this is a source of destruction, self-destruction, and also source of instability in the society.
As well as the kind of emotional and mental state that Syria will be in when this is all over. What about the kind of state it will be? We know that the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, a large part of the Syrian National Council has said it envisages an Islamic state. As a Sufi, as a scholar, what do you say to that?
They say they want an Islamic state because they judge Syria now as being non-Islamic. And we have totally different view. Syria is already an Islamic state. And 80% of the legislations in Syria are compatible in conformity with Islamic legislation, Islamic Sharia. Now, to change the 20 other percent, you have to consult all the people of Syria. You can't do it and force it on your own. Syria is not for Muslims, is not for Sunni Muslims alone. We have Christians of various denominations. We have other religious groups. So we can't decide on the future of Syria, especially in this troubling time. What we are calling for is just Syria to return as it was. With a constitution that the Syrian people would choose or vote for. And then, of course, I wish, that all people should be Muslims. But you have to distinguish between a wish and the call and the program and an agenda. I'm against, and the ulama traditionally have been all the time against politicizing Islam. The difference is very small between a practicing Muslim and a non-practicing Muslim. They are all Muslims, they are all servants of God, they all will be in heavens, in the gardens. Why should we judge the society as being non-Muslim? Why should we judge a woman who doesn't put on hijab as being non-Muslim and then force her to wear hijab?
So you clearly view the Islamic State of Syria very differently than the Muslim Brotherhood would view their version of an Islamic state.
From what
Syria.
I heard, I don't want any radical change into Syria now. What we need is freedom of speech. What we need is stopping the agony of the Syrian people. We need a regime that does not torture people.
But when that political argument begins, as it surely will ultimately, it will involve many groups, not just scholars like you and the Brotherhood. In those discussions that you will inevitably have, couldn't some members of the Muslim Brotherhood say to Syrian people, well, he may have had to leave in 2011, but we were kicked out a lot sooner for our attacks on Assad. We called Assad first.
Muslims Brotherhood was about to make a deal with the regime. They stopped all of their opposition activities against the regime upon the Israeli strike against Gaza. This is just before the uprising. As to their rebellion against the regime in 1980, even the Brotherhood themselves say they were not responsible for it. It was a military branch of the Brotherhood. However, the Syrian people and everyone agrees that it was not the right time to do it. And the way they did it by assassination and putting explosives wasn't right. And at that time, the ulama were calling for peaceful demonstrations. We don't start by assassinating top officials. We don't start by putting explosives. In my fatwas, I issued fatwa banning the use of landmines, suicide car bombs, artillery in inhabited areas. I even gave fatwa banning fighting in inhabited areas.
Those Muslims who are doing that in Syria and doing it because they feel they have no other choice, a fatwa from you might sound hollow at the moment. Empty. Indeed.
You're right. Because what leads us is reason. What is leading them is revenge. And there's a huge difference. And people with arms led by revenge are very difficult to control. And our voice might not be needed now or heard now. But I'm sure that there must always be a voice like us. We have to speak up. My main mission is not politics. So you see here the point is we're trying actually to put some reason into politics. We're trying to put some wisdom into fighting. And we're trying to, as much as possible, put people upright. It's very difficult when you have little resources, when our impact probably is not as much as it was before. Probably the ulama institution has lost a lot now because of the Syrian uprising and the funds pouring into Salafi groups or groups adopting political Islam. The ulama are now probably the weakest in terms of organization and influence. We don't have media. Major TV channels now are not in our hands. But even, if no one listens, I believe if I saved one life, I would be very proud to stand before God that I have saved the life of one person.
You say you're not political and you don't wish to become more political, and I understand exactly what you're saying. Is it inevitable that now, and once this comes to some kind of conclusion and then the rebuilding begins, that the message you've just given there, the messages you give on a daily basis, will be heard politically? You can't really control that, can you, in the light of events?
But the impact is very positive, different from when you have dirty politics and people. Let me give you one example. When I allowed people to rebel against the regime, I didn't use any religious justifications because they are Alawites. I said because they are oppressors.
You don't feel you're being drawn into politics?
No. I'm sure that, you know what I like more? Poetry. I write poetry in Arabic and in English. And the best I wish for now is to go back to the Umayyad Mosque where I used to teach and sit there without attending, need to attend any political gathering or any conference or talk about politics at all. Now it's part of our job when people use Islam and distort the image of Islam and make business out of Islam. It's our job to say, no, this is non-Islamic. Islam cannot allow revenge. Islam cannot allow killing innocent people. Islam will never allow forcing its principles by sword. We have to speak up. When you try to defend your people, this is not politics. When you try to clarify what is the message of Islam about, then this is not politics. It's my duty. I can't keep silent.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.